So I'm so happy to be back for another episode of Beyond the Box, where we are really interested in talking about the intersection between real estate, technology, and capital. And I couldn't think of a better person who has touched all of those points over a very, I would say probably colorful and pretty successful career in the real estate sector, Mr. Bill Andrews. So thank you for joining us today, Bill. So happy to have you with us.
Well, thank you for the invite. I am most happy to speak with you. We've known each other for a long time, and
we have.
It's just it's an amazing business, and I'm constantly reinventing myself. So,
well, I think, I love that you positioned it that way, because it's exactly why I wanted to invite you onto the podcast, because this is one of those industries where it does evolve. As I think, depending where you are, sometimes it feels like it's not moving at all, and in some ways it's moving at kind of warp speed. And I think, we're at a period in time where we're going to see some shifts happening. And what I love is you have gone through some shifts in the past. You've had to reinvent yourself based on some of these things, and would just love to have some of your perspective on what that has looked like, and maybe what this current situation might look like going forward. So I'd love for you to, first of all, just weave out a little bit of your origin story and what your trajectory has been through this crazy industry over the past 20-ish years. Would that?
Yep, 22 or 24 years, something like that.
Cool. So I'd love for you to weave that out for us.
Yeah, so it all happened by mistake. I was working, I got in the cell phone industry early. I had no idea what I was doing, and it was magnificent. We made all kinds of money back then. We used to make money on the usage, and Pactel Cellular had not spun off yet. They were still Pactel, running a mobile division, and we had the bag phones. You remember those bag phones?
Oh yes.
And that was my first foray into what I would call technology, and I was also part of the first sales force in the United States, maybe the world, that was outfitted with an IBM laptop, a Motorola flip phone, and all of the components to do business from my car on the road. So that was normal for me. Back in 1990, I would say 94, I would be on my laptop, and I hate to say this, but I'd be driving and I'd be typing, and I'd be.
It was dialing. Okay then, Bill. It was okay then.
Back then it was natural. It was what you did. But I would be getting mobile numbers back, running credit on people, and then we would have phones in our trunk and we'd program them. And so that was really the beginning of my foray into technology. And the first instance I had of really realizing that there's a never-ending search to use it is we were all the top reps probably in the country coming out of my office there in Woodland Hills, California. It was the business division. And we were always, when I go look at the list, I was always somewhere every month in the top 5 reps, somewhere in the California and the country, top 10. And then one crazy month, I looked up there and I saw out of the top 10, there were about 6 names that I didn't even recognize. So we had just done a hiring. And there was all these young people in the office, young guys and gals. And what happened was they came with their own laptops while all of the veterans were waiting for all our material to be printed, and for the person that does that to put our name on the flyers and those things. These people had done their own, and they hit the market early, and they got all the low-hanging fruit. And it occurred to me, I thought that was illegal. I said, why are they allowed to do their own stuff? And they said, well, there's nothing stopping them. That's, if you got a computer, go for it. And I realized, okay, so that's a game changer. There's never a time when you rest on your laurels, and it's going to be changing forever more. And that's exactly how it's been and what happened. Totally. And then from there, I left that career because I could see that the money and the ability for me to really structure and corner my market was leaving. And it was, the way I put it was, you were going to be able to get a free cell phone if you bought a Big Gulp at 7-Eleven. And I said, that's probably a bad sign. I should probably be thinking about it now. And I did. I went to work for iPix. And iPix was the first virtual tour company. that we actually were selling the cameras and the software, and then the broker or the agent would have to take the pictures to 180s and then stitch it to a 360.
Wow.
That's how I got in the business, and I thought that was amazing, and I thought that's how people were going to buy homes, because they told me that Will Smith did it, so I figured everybody was going to buy.
If
buy
Will does it, everybody will do it.
Turns out, yeah, it was a great piece to get you. It became. Here's the funny thing, that technology never really worked for people to use the virtual tour to buy a home. But what we figured out was that we would put a virtual tour on a floppy disk with an agent's name on it, and then they would use the floppy disk to do a listing presentation. And because the technology wowed the listing, the customers, they would choose them for that listing because they said, wow, you're doing something no one else is. And that lasted for a long time. So the rest went by the wayside.
So virtual tours, so that description of a virtual tour, I think, does not at all align with what the industry thinks of as a virtual tour today, right? Because,
right.
At the time that we're recording this, we're, 4-6 weeks into the COVID experience. And one of the things that we've seen really take off is, the increased use of virtual tours, but also platforms and tech companies evolving in a much different way to facilitate what you tried to accomplish back then. Back then, it was more of a marketing scheme, a marketing tool.
Yeah, it always boils down to this. My job was to sell virtual tours. And what I found out when I'd go do presentations in brokers' offices was the virtual tour was great, and you're supposed to use it to let people view the home. But because I was selling virtual tours, my job was, how do I get them to buy virtual tours? Well, by putting their name on a floppy, I said, if you buy these today, we'll take care of this for you. And even if you don't know the technology, you take this into your listing presentation, and there you go.
Right.
And so, of course, the tour took off and it grew legs of its own, but that's how I sold it. And that's how I figured out, how do we move this forward? Otherwise, without that, I want to say, greed factor, or the factor of making an agent understand, how does this work for me? How do I get business from this? That's what my job was. Okay, right. It's a virtual tour, but unless we move this forward, it's going to do nothing.
So I love that. I love that you wove out sort of that baseline of how you entered the space. But you and I have known each other in a very different capacity. I mean, you've moved through a couple of different organizations since you and I have known one another. So from there, what was sort of the next trajectory to where you are now? And I've purposely kind of left that, for you to weave out. I don't want to be the spoiler, because you've made another relatively recent move.
Yeah, I've always been, I realized that some people look at me, but I don't want to settle in and be bored. I want to be making decisions, and I want to be on the front end of things that are exciting, and I'm deciding how those things play out and move forward, and how my life does. From there, I went to a company called Crescenda, and it stood for Customers Receiving and Sending Data. And unintentionally, I had the first MLS. I was responsible for, we had a Palm Pilot with a modem. And it was ridiculous because they each had a charger, and I think the modem took 6 hours to charge and the Palm Pilot took 2 hours to charge. And you put the two together, and it was in black and white with a little stylus pen. But I convinced Rapatoni to put their MLS on that. So I sold the very first device that held the MLS on a device that was cellular handheld. And it was two pieces. And that's what launched me into Rapatoni, because when they didn't get the rest of the funding, the idea was there, the seed was planted that it could be done, and that you could get an MLS on a device, which had not been done and no one was willing to do it, all the other MLSs. It all of a sudden became a natural. Andy Rapatoni called me and said, I want you to start selling my internet-based MLS. It's brand new. Come on over here and let's move.
Very cool. So you've been at the bleeding edge of what I would say the real estate sector, in terms of the realtors on the ground, know as, the MLS system.
Yep.
You were at the forefront of marketing those systems from an internet base anyway, into the hands of the market. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
unintentionally,
Yeah.
but I was lucky because I saw how things played out and how people had the wrong idea. I had a call one day when this was all playing out, and it was all the major carriers, AT&T, T-Mobile, all of those, and they were all talking amongst each other about how much they were going to charge us, and we had to pay them. And I said, you guys have completely missed the point. We won't pay you a dime. This is going to happen whether or not you like it, because it's going to happen over the internet. And this is just a device that people can use to access the internet.
Right.
So,
Right.
so good luck with all of this. And they really didn't understand, they weren't seeing the big picture because they were looking at it from their small corner of the world, when in fact it was a game changer, and it was going to be a game changer.
Cool. So that took you to Rapatoni.
Mm-hmm.
And then just really quickly, you've had, I mean, there are a few other stops that you've had along the way, but just let us know kind of what those stops are, what what product you were selling, because it's always been in tech, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And kind of where you're at now. And then I'd love to pivot to some of the experiences that you have had through your trajectory.
Sure. So the main points were Rapatoni, and I was there for I think 8 or 9 years. And we really stormed the market, and we took a big market share, and we were doing incredibly well with the internet-based MLS. Then I met my favorite guys in the business, which were Brian DeShepper and Sean Conover. And I tell you, it was maybe the best time, the most fun time, because they had the spirit of having fun and technology and being kind of bold and brazen and just having a lot of fun in the process. And I loved that. And I went there, and we won some major accounts. And it was wonderful because our support team and our group was another piece that moved the MLS forward. It was incredibly fast, lightning fast. And then without any knowledge, all of a sudden we were purchased. Those guys did, but we were purchased by CoreLogic. And that was another foray into it, because I was really the only guy that knew Matrix. So a lot of my position was going and doing all the demos for us. And some interesting times there, the things that I said and did to win business. But I've always been honest and transparent. And so if that didn't work for somebody, fine, you can show me the door, or I'll hit the door on my own. And then I got a little bit bored there after a while. I was taking care of most of the major accounts, CRMLS and MLS listings, and some great people that I've known over the years. And I decided to take a position with Zillow because they wanted me for the API. And I thought that would be the next level of technology that was going to help vendors get into the market and allow for data to move faster and safer. And I did that, and I had a lot of fun. And then they pivoted to more of Bridge, which was some of the listing input. And at that point, I decided I had met a lot of vendors, and I was excited about that technology. And that's where I met the guys at Remind, LionDesk, Rate My Agent, a bunch of really good vendors with good products. And I did that as a consultant. And then, of course, I took a position with Remind, who wanted me to invest more time with them just in the direction of the MLS and the business and understanding that. And then most recently, as you know, again, I pivoted and I went over to Black Knight with some great folks that I've known for many years and respected. And I just thought, with everything I've done and everything I've been involved in, the MLS has always been my knowledge center, my cornerstone, my comfort zone. And so I decided with Black Knight, that was most recently, to do it again. And I've never cared what anyone says. I always say jokingly, I just can't hold a job. But the truth is, sometimes I don't want to hold a job. I know when my time is ready, when it's time to move on, because I don't want to be a guy that hangs on and looks for a safe spot. That's just, it's no way for me to go through life.
So I so appreciate that about you, Bill. And one of the things that I absolutely love, and for those that are either watching this or will be listening to this, I've come to know you as probably the most genuine person, end stop. And then I could also add in the real estate sector. But you it's your approach, I think, that has just provided, I love when you say, I've never wanted to hold a job, because that's the ethos that you kind of give out. This isn't a job to me. I do this because I love it. And the other piece that I will say is just how deep your relationships are in this industry. And it's really been about, I'm hoping that a good number of people that are listening to this podcast have had the opportunity to experience a Bill Andrews curated dinner, because it is an experience second to none. It's always at a great place. Yes. So the food and the drink is excellent, but it's more than that. It's the people that you bring together. And, I've had the privilege of being invited to a few of those. And what I've always appreciated is, I don't even know the people that are at the table with me. You have simply just curated an opportunity for people to get to know one another, that really, whether or not it serves your business objectives, is not the root of the invitation, and neither is it the nature of the conversation. And there is nobody that I have come across in this industry who has nothing but just the highest level of appreciation and admiration for you as a human being. And I think that's the piece that I'd like to, just sort of get some of your thoughts around, in terms of, you said something a bit earlier and I jotted a note, and it was, my job was always to figure out how to get it there. And, I can't help but believe that the figuring it out was exactly through that channel. And the relationships that you built and how you built those. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, because I think, the intersection between real estate and technology, and even capital to a certain degree, has another element in there that is none of those. And it's, I think, the unique piece that you bring to the equation.
Well, first, thank you so much for saying that. Those are some really kind words, and
All very genuine.
But that is, I think, one of the pleasures that we all have in this business is taking that time to be with each other and not selling there, just getting to know people and getting to know, I think the most important thing that anybody in our business can know is be a problem solver. There's lots of problems. And but in order to be a problem solver, you have to be a good listener. And there's a time and a place for that. And a dinner, I'm really just trying to break bread, have fun, create an environment where someone wants to talk to you and wants to tell you what their issues are, and that it's an honest conversation. And sometimes you can't solve that problem, or sometimes you don't have the right product, and you have to be ready to accept that, because otherwise you will kill any goodwill that you have, because relationships are everything in this business. Mm-hmm. If they weren't, then I couldn't go from company to company and be able to still pick up the phone and call someone, because I think they know when I call them. I'm not trying to sell them anything. I'm just trying to tell them, I'm here now. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what we have. If you find that something in this product line works for you, give me a call. I'll be honest with you. And that's the way I want it. And so as I've done this, and as I've gone through this, it's the relationships that have always carried me through, and that have always allowed me to do business with people. And so much so, I love it so much. I brought my 3 sons into this business. I said, I can't teach you much, but I can teach you, if you're interested in this business, how it works. And I love the people in it, and I love what we do, and I love the fact that it's such a technology-based business now, but it's still human to human, and it's still all about contact. So you have to find a way to make any new and emerging technology. You have to know your audience, and you have to figure out, how is this going to help somebody? How's this going to solve a problem for somebody? And that's fun.
Yeah, and I love that you just wove that thread all the way through, because, I think a lot of people often ask, or one of the questions that I hear often is, well, things are changing, things are going to evolve and they're going to change. And, that's just a truism of life, right? The only thing that doesn't change is that everything changes, right? And so, one of the questions I was going to ask you is, in your experience, how have things changed? And I'd be interested to hear it. But, I think your last answer almost kind of says it doesn't matter, because what, the one constant thread is those relationships, and, just being willing to understand people's issues so that you can create a path to a solution, even if you don't have the solution. But I would love to hear, your perspectives on, how has this space changed, and how do you think it might change further?
Well, that's really an interesting question, and here's where it really changed. When I first got into the business and I started asking, I would go to a top broker or a top agent. One of the questions I'd ask during the process was, "May I get your email so that I could get something to you?" And they would often say, "Well, one second, let me get my assistant." They would say, "Hey, Betty, what is my email again?" And in the early days, they were still using, if they were a Coldwell Banker agent, they were using their Coldwell Banker, if they were, whatever they were. But then they quickly learned, hey, I want to have my own email.
Right.
And so I realized, number one, they don't know their own email, so their chances are they're not reading their email. So that's probably not a good idea.
Good point.
And then secondly, I think the biggest swing in the business, and this shows you how things can change so dramatically but still be the same. In the old days, and I'm talking old days, probably 2000. That was still when public did not have access to listings and to what was available. So an agent, quite frankly, could be playing golf or be lazy or be doing nothing and still hold someone hostage because they were waiting for what homes can we go look at. And so they had no ability to challenge you or to find something without you. And like all of us, I mean, those things sharpen your blade, the fact that someone might find something before you. But first, because they weren't accepting change, they were angry about the data being out there. So the Zillows and the Realtor.coms and all the sites that could start showing data made people mad. Instead of embracing it, saying, okay, well, now I can actually figure out who's my real interested buyers, because if we're talking and they're doing a lot of searching, I've got a real hot prospect. But that's the positive view of it. The negative view is, this sucks, I don't have control anymore, and I want control. But those who embraced the fact that, okay, the horse is out of the barn, how do I now, what's my next thing? Maybe I should be a horse wrangler. Because the barn's not doing me any good anymore when the horse is out of it.
Right.
And so it really was the first change. But bottom line is, even today, with people searching on their own and having all the technology and all the capability, they still need someone that can have some of the hard conversations regarding the property, that can advise them legally, or that can advise them in terms of pricing in the market and what's happened in the neighborhood. And that's the relationship builder. The searching part never was. That was just an easy way to knock down a sale. So now, if I'm an agent, I understand one thing, and I've known this through all business. And when you have an easy process with something, you have little chance of building a relationship. When there are instances where there's some difficulty or some challenging things, when you work through that with someone, whether it's buying a house or selling a house, it does build a relationship, and it builds a trust, because you are working through the issue. You're not ducking it. You're asking the hard questions. You're doing those things. And that's the true gold in it. That's where you become, and that's where you find your value, because your knowledge and your confidence grows every time you do that. You learn not to run away from something. And I've got a really, really interesting story. Just a few days ago, I'll say that it's a person that's very close to me called me and presented me with a problem. Their company wanted something, the customer wasn't going to allow something else, and there seemed to be a big divide. And my first question was, have you called that person in charge, that CEO, and have you presented him with this issue? And he said, no, I think it's going to be an issue. I said, well, no, that nothing's going to get solved unless you go to the source and you say, we have an issue, and I need to talk with you, and I need some options, and we need to talk about some options so I can serve you. And within 10 minutes of him making the call, everything got solved. They said, okay, I understand. We're going to make an exception in this case and move forward, because we've put a lot of effort into this, and I think you're right, we can do this. But the initial answer was, no way, not going to happen. But that's how you work through those things.
There's so much to unpack out of what you just said, Bill. And I think, it's really the crux of, what I was, the genesis of this conversation and what I was hoping we could tackle. But, just a couple of nuggets that I want to pull out of what you just shared with us is, first and foremost, technology, if it makes it easier, it doesn't make it better, because you've eliminated that opportunity to really understand where the friction is. So I love, kind of your point around, if there aren't some bumps in the road, you're not growing and learning, but you may not also be serving your client or whoever your
Mm-hmm.
ultimate customer is very well either, because they haven't really understood what their needs are, right? So
Right.
I love that. I love that, because I think that's a piece of, the psychology in the industry a little bit has been, and you said it earlier, like, if I want to control change, so it's been like, well, I don't want to accept any change because I don't want anything to change, because then I'm out of control, right? But here's the thing: if you accept the fact that things will change, but also understand that the relationship and
Mm-hmm.
the interaction is still the most important component, then the change isn't scary, because you have
Yep.
just evolved to meet that need, right? And I think it just elevates the degree to which you're needed in that transaction. So I love that piece. And then your story is amazing, because it does highlight how sometimes it's just, it's, eating that frog, right? Just do it.
Yeah.
Just, you kind of do. You just have to do
That's
it. You have
well
to pick up
said.
the phone, right?
Yes.
But it's a hard thing to do. And so, I guess one of the things that I'd love to hear from you is, over your career, given kind of all of those as the basic foundations, what have you found? Because you have sold into MLSs, although you've had a lot of interface with brokers and agents, because
Yep.
to help the MLSs in terms of transition to new technology.
Yes.
What have been some of the most sort of timeless strategies that you have employed, that you found, regardless of, who you were working with, what technology you were representing? What are those kind of, tools in the toolbox that you find most important?
Well, I think, you have to, number one, you have to know your audience,
Hmm.
and you have to understand our business. Now, in our business, in most cases, data is crucial. Data is king. And so you have to understand, where is the data, who controls it, how do I get it? What are the factors in becoming a vendor that has access to the data? So my product is animated, it's alive. And that's what data does for software. I mean, it's dead until the data's in there, then
Right.
it's alive. And
I love
so,
that. Great analogy.
and it's what changes business. And it's how every person looks at a piece of software and they assess how they can use it. It's one piece, but because people are individuals and because people are creative, they find the means that it works for them. And so I would say, for a vendor coming into this market, let's start there. Look at your product, figure out who's going to be using it. And when I say know your audience, it's know that a great number of agents are not looking to do a lot of business. So there are some that are retired. They used to be maybe a school teacher, a fireman, or a policeman, and they've got a pension. And so they've got, some source of income, but nobody wants to sit around the house. They want a life, and they want the ability to still generate money and have a social life. And that propels a lot of people into real estate, because you work for yourself. There's really not a lot of pressure unless you put it on yourself in many cases. In some cases there are. And so you have to assess, how much does this person want to spend, and what's their goal, as opposed to, so you have to understand, if your product is driven toward brokers, what are broker challenges? Those have changed over the years. They used to get a desk fee. And so they wanted a lot of people sitting there so they could charge for a phone and for these things. And then people started working out of the home. So there's that shift again. And you just have to know your audience. Data is always going to be key whenever you're there. And it's really having an honest, appraisable assessment of how do I move it into the market, and who's going to get me there. And sometimes the way that happens is, there's a company I was working with, and you know them. And when they called me, they had no idea. They had been working in the United States for, I think, 3 or 4 years, and buying data from sources that didn't work. And I said, well, let's just jump on the road. Let's go talk to some MLSs I can hook you up with, and let's ask them what they think of your product. let's ask them if this is scary for brokers. Let's really get their opinion. And for the most part, we got a pretty positive feedback, although some felt that it might compete with brokers, but that's always going to be there. So you can't let that dissuade you. You have to go and do your research and do some honest appraisal and go right to the source. Don't be afraid. Just like I said, when there was an issue, call the person that can make a change for you and explain why this has to be done to be successful, and find a workaround. And I think it's the same trying to get in the market with a product. You just have to do some homework and know your audience.
I love that. It's such amazing advice, Bill, because I think, again, that's what we see so many times. And, you and I have both seen a lot of tech come and go, right? Which means that's a lot of companies and a lot of people that have kind of come and gone. Some have tried to recycle a few times, right? And I think, in the absence of figuring that equation out, it's
right.
ultimately, it doesn't matter how great your solution is. If you don't figure out what you've built, who your audience is, that, you need something to make that product come to life, right? And it's,
Yep.
I would agree with you, it's generally data, and then really understanding what the needs are. You can have the greatest piece of tech, but if nobody buys it, it's just a piece of tech, right? So
yeah, in the end, you have to find where the value is in it. And it's different in all products. And I want to say this, I think, the one problem that I see with our industry is a lot of people want to pick and choose winners and losers. And I think there needs to be more time spent, because, it wasn't so much so when I first got in the business, there was no one allowed from the outside. It was very closed. And so a vendor would really go through hell to try and get in the door. But now people are more accepting of meeting vendors and technology. But there's not enough time set aside to evaluate it and to give opportunities and to really look at it. And I think that's because everyone's a little bit rushed and judgmental. But the other thing I've tried to do is all my life, I've tried to not have an opinion when I see a piece of software or a business model. When I used to work at Rapatoni, we would talk to a lot of vendors, and I made sure that I kept one day a week open to just listen, because you might hear 50 pitches and then you might find an absolute gem, something that you see a vision for, and you can say, I think this is going to make it immediately, and this is the approach I take, and how can we help you? Because this is going to be great for us to offer our users and for you to flourish in this market.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. It's so much of what we have seen, isn't it, over the last few years, is just how the space has become, I guess, maybe a bit more collaborative rather than as competitive. So
right.
Much more open and welcoming for new solutions and new companies to come forward, but also more collaborative, I would say, even with the incumbents in terms of working with and integrating with some of this new tech. So, I'm hopeful that that's, a sign for, a lot of, additional innovation in the space. So I'm just conscious of time here and know we need to wrap up, but again, we're recording this a little bit during this period of time where there's a lot of turmoil, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of vendors are probably wondering, how this piece of time is going to impact them. Probably a lot of, requests for deferral of payments and maybe some renewals that aren't happening. Given everything we've talked about over the last 30 minutes or so, in terms of the approach of really selling technology into this space, I want to start here. Where do you see the opportunity in this period of time for the real estate sector, especially with technology?
Well, I think what's going to happen here is we've seen everything kind of come to a halt. Now, I'm a believer that human nature, whether you want to believe hundreds of thousands or millions of years, you can't just change it over one virus.
Right.
It's going to be it's going to somehow go back to people are going to travel, people are going to eat together, people are going to, I always liken this to, painful times where you say this will never happen again, but the further you move away from pain, the less you remember it. And so when we move away from this, but I do think there's a gem in here, this kind of leveled the playing field. So you had agents that are top agents that don't do much business, and they all found themselves in the same place. And this is a good time to reinvent yourself, because when you hit a point where you're all in the same boat and the same thing is happening across the board and it's affecting people buying homes or selling homes, you have a chance to see, okay, here's the time to reset. What do I want to do? What is my goal? You know, what do I need to do to reach that? Let me go look at some technology. And there's some really good stuff out there. To me, anything that you can use that, number one, promotes you, keeps you connected. I think the biggest issue I've seen over the years is once an agent sells a home for someone or helps someone buy a home, there's been a lack of the ability to stay close to that person. So you built this relationship, but they may not need you for 8 or 9 more years. So you have to figure out, for 8 or 9 more years, what can I bring to this person that's of value? And that can be constant monitoring of the value of their home, of their neighborhood, of things that you can do for them. You know, you have to stay in front of them. And they need to remember what you did, and that you're there, and that you become someone that's familiar to them through the whole process. And so anything that helps you to do that, and then anything that helps you to be able to use technology and gather it in one place. And so if you pick 3 or 4 or 5 products, you want the ability to integrate those products. So look for software like that, things that will help you to become more efficient. You can't log in and log out of 8 or 10 systems a day. You have to have the ability to log into something and find your scope of what's important to do over the next hour, as opposed to what's important to do over the next 8 hours or a week.
Right. I love that.
So,
That's such great insight, Bill. And I think, again, in terms of the companies and the technology that we see, as part of the REACH program, and evaluating, companies that are already in market, those are the ones that are starting to percolate to the top, right? Are those that are enhancing the relationship almost, as opposed to disintermediating the process, right? And I think that's definitely something that I've heard loud and clear through our conversation, is that's an important component in this industry. But because of the nature of real estate's a very personal purchase. It's a very infrequent purchase, and therefore the relationship is a very important component. I love that. So just to wrap it up, I have 2 last questions for you. First one, and I suspect it's not the one on the back on the wall behind you, but when's the last time you were on your surfboard?
Oh, about 2 weeks ago, because
did you get out? Yeah.
Well, yeah, they've closed most of the beaches. It's hard to get access, and it's also been red tide out here, which is a condition that in this case it's been so severe that the water is brown, and there's at night you can see, of course, the glow in the water, but during the day it's brown. Wow. And so it's been a little bit stinky and brown, and the beaches have been weird because lifeguards are on bullhorns telling you to keep moving. So it's in a couple of weeks, and I'm just waiting for things to get back to normal. So that's
cool.
That's that.
Cool. That's cool. Well, I still am looking forward to the day when I get to come down and get a surf lesson from Bill Andrews. So that's still on my bucket list. So you know. And here's the last question I have for you. What's the next event you think you and I are going to be able to enjoy a dinner together?
I'm thinking, I'm hopeful that I think we might be able to see November NAR. I think there's a good chance that we'll all be at that. I could see some of the travel coming back a little bit, very limited, but I think that by then we'll have some things figured out. If they have some of the fixes in place, for example, like a vaccine or things that they've found that are, I think people will be more confident about traveling and not having severity, and weighing the risks of how long do I stay here and how long do I stay holed up, as opposed to our industry is very reliant on relationships and seeing each other eyeball to eyeball and those things. And I think I look forward to it, because I think this will be a especially sweet one. I think people will be very happy to see each other and to all be back. And so I think I'll see you in November.
Awesome.
And we'll see what happens.
Well, you know what, I certainly hope so. And whether it's November or whether it's, sometime in 2021, I definitely look forward to the next time you and I get to hang out, because it's always such a pleasure. And I really appreciate you agreeing to do this today. It was so great to see you, so great to chat with you. And I wish you all the best with your new gig.
Well, thanks. I'm honored, and I wish you the best as well. I know your background and your level of knowledge in the business is going to help all those vendors out there in Canada, and I hope they're listening, because it's an opportunity for them to glean something off what you're doing, and I wish you the best of luck in that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you, my friend.
Thanks,
Take good
Lynette.
care, and I look forward to
Okay.
next time we chat. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.